We have two speakers, very well-renowned figures in the field of transarterial radioembolization. And our first speaker is Dr. Antonio Lacosta, who is an interventional radiologist in Pamplona. I don't know how do you pronounce it. Pamplona in Spain. Okay. Who has more than 10 years experience in transarterial radioembolization. Dr. Antonio.
Thank you. Okay. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the symposium. So, what I'm going to talk about is the process of treating patients with serous spheres. Now, we know that there is a whole bunch of what I call liver local therapies in order to treat tumors which are localized in the liver. One form of treatment would be ablation, for example, and ablation works well with small localized tumors. There are many different ways we can do ablation. We can use cold and cryotherapy, we can use radiofrequency waves, we can use microwaves, even alcohol. So all these procedures work well, but are limited to patients with small localized tumors. In order to expand the indications, we need to use other agents, such as chemotherapy. Chemotherapy, we know, works well with metastases, but it doesn't work so well with hepatocellular carcinoma, as we can see. For example, there is experience with administration of chemotherapy in HCC. If you look at the graph here, you can see patients treated with intraarterial chemotherapy in black, with intravenous chemotherapy in red, and not treated in green. This is patients with HCC. You see that at 12 months after diagnosis, the probability of survival is almost the same for each of the patients in these three groups. So basically, I think chemotherapy actually gives us a tumor response rate, but doesn't improve survival rates for the patients. In order to improve that, well, the idea was to mix chemotherapy with some form of mechanism or device that would carry it to the liver and target the liver tumors. And that's how chemoembolization was born. Chemoembolization can be done with Lipiodol, and in the old days, and now in the modern era, people are using drug-eluting beads more and more frequently. Lipiodol, I think it's a good agent, and we know from experience that it works. But I think it has a few problems. One of the problems is that we are trying to mix an oil-based agent, such as Lipiodol, with an agent which is not oil-soluble, but is water-soluble anti-cancer drug. And that makes the mixture not very stable, and I think that's a problem. Also, the efficacy of Lipiodol, although we all know it works, has not been clinically demonstrated. And there is no data available showing that Lipiodol is capable of releasing the chemotherapeutic agent slowly. Also, the arterial occlusion that provides is not long-lasting and makes assessment of residual vascularity difficult on CT. And most importantly, I think there is no international standard as to how we should do chemoembolization with Lipiodol. I think in this part of the world, there is a lot of experience with Lipiodol, and some people get very, very good results, but in other places, I think it's not the same. So in order to achieve, better and more homogeneous results, drug-eluting beads were applied. These are beads that actually carry the chemotherapeutic agent to where the tumor is, and in theory, they produce a slow release of the drug. Therefore, at least theoretically, we should get better results. Also, the advantage is that we get lower levels of doxorubicin in the systemic circulation, and therefore less complications. Now, this is true up to a certain extent. It's true that, as it has been shown on clinical studies, that the number of complications and side effects decreases, but actually the effectivity of these spheres is not much better than what we were using before in terms of results with the patients. Also, embolization causes cell necrosis, and hypoxia is actually a stimulus for the tumor cells to grow. And also, if we cause necrosis, it's doubtful that the chemotherapy will actually reach any viable cells. And as I said to start with, I think HCC is a chemo-resistant tumor. It's not the same with liver metastasis, but HCC is a chemo-resistant tumor. So I think that rather than using chemotherapy to treat HCC, the idea is to use radiation to treat HCC, as HCC is known to be very radiosensitive. The problem with radiation in the liver is that in order to achieve curative doses, we need to, for example, for HCC would be in the region of 100 grays, for adenocarcinoma would be 80, 90 grays. So in order to achieve that kind of radiation doses in the liver, we know that at 30 grays, the liver actually stops working. So the idea is to deliver a high dose of radiation to the tumor without actually exceeding the 30 or 40 gray limit to the liver. And how can that be done? Well, from the outside of the patient, we can actually treat tumors with conformal beam radiotherapy. That is, not using one single beam, but trying to split the dose in several beams. And the point where the 3 or the 4 beams collide, we achieve a high dose, and we get low dose in the remaining healthy liver. This works well when you have a case like this, a single, well-defined, localized tumor. We can treat this with conformal beam radiotherapy. The problem is when we face cases like this, okay? Very diffuse tumor elsewhere, how can we actually deliver high dose to the tumor and low dose to the liver? Well, the way of doing it is with selective internal radiation therapy. And I think that's where this technique has a role to play, okay? It's a combination of radiation with embolization, okay? And it's based on the concept that the liver has a dual blood supply. The liver receives blood from the hepatic artery and also from the portal vein. Most of the blood that actually feeds the hepatocytes comes from the portal vein. And the blood coming from the hepatic artery actually feeds mainly the biliary tree, and in patients with tumors, the tumors. So if we target, we actually have a road to reach the tumors, which is the hepatic artery. Also, we know that the tumors are mainly supplied by it. So that would be the road to get the spheres into the tumor. With chemoembolization, even when we use calibrated spheres, they are big in size, so they actually have an occlusive effect which is proximal to the tumor in most cases. And that means they cause ischemia. With radioembolization, on the other hand, we're using much smaller particles that actually get embedded within the tumor, emitting radiation. And there is almost no ischemic effect associated with it. So this is a big difference between the two techniques. Now, this is supposed to be an animation, but because I work in a Mac, it doesn't work on the PC, so you won't be able to see the animation, right? So what I'm trying to demonstrate here is that in order to do radioembolization or any liver arterial directed therapy, we need 3 things. We need a road to get in, which is the hepatic artery and the blood flow in it. We need a car to take the agent, which is a carrier. In this case, we are talking small microspheres, and we need an agent. The agent could be physical, chemical, or biological. In this case, we are talking about yttrium-90. Yttrium-90 is the radiation emitting source. Yttrium-90 is a pure beta emitter, so that means that it emits energy in the range of 0.93 megaelectron volts. Most importantly, it has a half-life of 64 hours. That means that 10 half-lives is virtually the life of the product. So if you multiply 64 by 10, it's 640 hours. Roughly after 2 or 3 weeks after injection, there is almost no activity left in the patient. Because it's beta radiation, it has a very short radiation range, and that's good, because we want the radiation to affect the tumor and not affect the healthy liver. And in terms of radiation safety, it's good as well, because after treatment, the patient does not need to be isolated. The car is are the Sears spheres in this case, and they are made of resin. They are 35 microns in size, and in a typical treatment or dose, you will get between 50 and 60 million microspheres injected. Now, there's the same thing as before, but here we should look at two things. One, we are assuming that anything that we inject here is going to remain within the tumor and is not going to leave the tumor through the venous side. And then we are also assuming that, the anatomy is very simple. There is a single feeding vessel to the tumor. This is not true in real life, okay? So the thing gets a bit more complicated than this. This is why radioembolization is a two-stage procedure. In my opinion, the most important part of the technique is the first procedure, is what we call the workup procedure, because that's when you have to make decisions as to how you're going to treat the tumor. You are going to study the tumor, you're going to study the vascular supply, you have to prepare the arteries of the patient for the treatment. So all the thinking and all the work takes place during the workup procedure. And then on a second stage, typically 1 to 2 weeks later, the patient undergoes the treatment. Yeah? Okay. So let's start by looking at the workup procedure. The workup angiography is very, very important. That's the time when we have to evaluate the arterial anatomy of the patient and any anatomical variants. What we call the normal anatomy is only present in about 40% of the patients. So, 60% of the patients will have some form of arterial variation that we need to identify and study. Okay. Two, apart from looking at the anatomy of the patient, that is, drawing the map of the road, we need to identify any vessels that are actually taking blood to the liver and outside the liver at the same time. In this case here, you can see the hepatic artery. Yeah, and there is this vessel coming here. This is the gastroduodenal artery. So we were to perform an injection from the hepatic artery, we will have to occlude the gastroduodenal artery in order for the spheres not to leave the liver towards the duodenum. And then we'll have to look at vessels like this, which is a small right gastric artery, which also has to be coil embolized in order to prevent the spheres from reaching the stomach. Once we've done that, it is safe to treat the patient from this position. And all these little vessels, to be honest with you, I started doing this in 2003. Before that, I did a lot of chemoembolization and so on. The right gastric artery was a vessel that, I never paid attention to it. I didn't even know it existed. So it's only when you start doing this procedure that you have to start looking at these tiny vessels, because they are very important if you want to avoid complications. Like here, for example, a small right gastric artery can cause a gastric ulcer if the spheres go there, or even here, a very, very small falciform artery, it's a vessel the size of a hair. It's a vessel that we don't pay attention to it, in chemoembolization or in other embolization procedures, but here it's important, because if you don't see it, then, and you get patient treated, you will get a radiation dermatitis, like in this case. So I think this procedure for interventional radiologists is very interesting, and you never get bored, because you need to know a lot of anatomy, and you need good technical skills also in order to close all these vessels. Also, the workup angiogram has another utility, and that's to detect any extrahepatic arterial tumor supply. In this case here, you can see an HCC close to the dome of the liver. So, if you think that I'll treat this patient from the common hepatic artery, it's going to be okay. The trouble is that part of the tumor is being fed by a phrenic artery. So you have to identify also not only the arteries that take blood to the liver, the branches of the hepatic artery, but also the extrahepatic branches that supply tumors, because you have to deal with them as well. If you treat this patient from the hepatic artery and leave the phrenic artery as it is, one portion of the tumor will not receive treatment, and that will be a cause in the future the tumor will grow. Okay? So you have to bear in mind also all the potential sources of blood supply to tumors arising from outside the hepatic artery. Okay, once we've done the angiogram, we've done the mapping, we've done the coiling, we've decided how we're going to treat the patient. Okay, the next step is to make sure that all the activity we're going to inject is going to remain within the liver. Okay, so we have to check that we've done a good job, and the way to do that is by injecting albumin labeled with technetium-99 into at the same point as we intend to inject the microspheres. And then we see what happens with the albumin. Is the albumin staying within the liver, or is it going outside? So one route that the albumin can take is it can go into the venous hepatic veins and from there into the lungs. And this happens normally. I mean, most of the patients will get some degree of shunting. It's okay to get some shunting as long as it doesn't exceed, a potential radiation dose to the lungs above 30 grays. Okay? So in order to measure the shunting, we do regions of interest anteriorly and posteriorly through the lungs and also through the liver. And it's just a simple calculation. We can calculate the percentage of shunting to the lungs. 2, we can check if all the coiling we've done has been successful. So if we see any activity outside the liver itself. In this case here, you can see at the top on the left, you can see the hepatic angiogram. The artery was coiled, the gastroduodenal artery, but wasn't well coiled. So when the MAA was done, there was all this activity, which is outside the liver, it's in the duodenum. So we have to check the angiogram again. I mean, this is a very crude example, just for... Here you can see that because the artery has not been coiled right to the origin, there is a small pyloric branch that has been left open, and that's where, that's taking the activity outside the liver. So that has to be dealt with. So more coiling has to be done in order to close that, and after that, we get a satisfactory distribution of the isotope. Also in this case here, we can see that there is some, well, we've got the liver, there's a hot spot here in the axial plane, in the sagittal, in the coronal plane. So we are not too sure, is that inside the liver, is it outside the liver? So rather than doing plenary scintigraphy, I think the correct thing, if available, is to do SPECT CT. With SPECT CT, we can actually match the nuclear medicine images with the CT anatomical images. So we get a physiological information together with the anatomical information, matched together. And then we can see that that activity is actually outside the liver and is actually in the stomach itself. So the way to proceed with is to do the test angiogram, do the angiogram, the angiographic workup, the coiling, the MAA injection, and then sit down and decide, how you're going to treat the patient. Okay. So if there is no extrahepatic accumulation, then the patient is okay and can go for treatment straight away. If there is some extrahepatic accumulation, then you always have to review the angiogram and see, have I missed a small artery? Am I not seeing something? Where is the MAA escaping? So you have to check that, yeah? And if reviewing is not enough, you have to repeat the angiogram, actually, several sections, okay? What about the gallbladder? Is it okay to get radiation into the gallbladder? Are we allowed to do that? Well, it's better not to, yeah, because if you get radiation to the gallbladder, that may produce cholecystitis. On the other hand, if you try to coil the cystic artery in order to prevent radiation cholecystitis, you make it an ischemic cholecystitis itself. So this is an open debate there's an open debate as to whether we should be coiling, the cystic artery or not. In my opinion, I think like in this case, when there is, most of the activity is in the gallbladder rather than in the liver, I would certainly coil the cystic artery or try to inject the activity from a more distal location. But otherwise, I don't worry too much about the gallbladder. Okay, this is another example here where you can see the hepatic artery. There is a big cystic artery coming off, not the hepatic artery itself, but from this branch, yeah, and then there's the gastroepiploic artery. If you look here, you see that the tumor is being fed by the hepatic artery, but also by this branch of the cystic artery, okay? So here I think we've got, this is a case that actually shows all what I've said so far, yeah? We've got extrahepatic supply to, we've got some extrahepatic supply to the tumor, so we have to deal with that because that portion of tumor will be left untreated, okay? So what we did here is I did a selective catheterization of the cystic artery just to demonstrate that supply to the tumor, and obviously that segment was coiled, so you get what's called flow redistribution. This part of the tumor being supplied by the cystic artery no longer receives supply from there, and now we can treat the whole lesion from one single injection point. Okay. This is another example where we can actually see the angiogram, we see the liver, so everything looks okay. The patient has the SPECT CT, but, you know, surprise, the left lobe of the liver has no activity. So what happened there? Okay, what happened is that there is an accessory left hepatic artery coming off the left gastric artery, which went unnoticed, okay? So if we don't do the MAA injection and the SPECT CT, you know, we would have never picked that up, okay? So it's very important to do a very thorough angiogram, and it's very important to do the MAA injection as well, in order to pick up all these things. Now, the concept of flow redistribution, I've mentioned that already. What happens is, for example, here we get the right hepatic artery, you know, feeding most of the liver, but we also have an accessory left hepatic artery coming off the left gastric artery. Now, I wouldn't advise to inject, you know, any spheres from, you know, in the left gastric artery, because there is a high risk of reflux, and if any spheres go into the stomach, then it means serious problem for the patient. So the way to deal with that is to actually occlude, you know, the communication between the gastric artery and the left hepatic artery. We're actually disconnecting the left hepatic artery supply. That is not a problem, because almost immediately collaterals open from the right hepatic artery, and that region of the liver is still perfused arterially, but from the right hepatic artery. And now we can do a safe treatment from this location. Okay, the MAA scan could in a way, you know, is it a good predictor of dose distribution? In other words, we're using albumin, which is a, you know, it's a non-uniform substance, different size to the spheres. Okay, so are we sure that, you know, wherever the albumin goes, the spheres are going to go, or the distribution is going to be the same? The answer to that is not really. Okay, so albumin is not really a good surrogate for the spheres. But nevertheless, you know, when we see a case like this, you know, where we see the tumor, we see the SPECT CT, well, and then we fuse the images, we know that, you know, this part of the tumor receives a lot of activity, this other part not so much, okay? So although albumin cannot be used as a true predictor, I still use it, you know, when I calculate the dose to consider if the patient may need any dose reduction or not. Okay, here you've got like 4 different examples. One where there is a good match with the tumor and the activity, some others where there is a good match of the tumor, but also some extratumoral uptake, and so on, yeah, up to this case where there's actually no match. So for example, in this case, the tumor is here, the activity is everywhere except in the tumor. Shall we treat this patient? Shall we not treat him? The answer is, I would treat the patient, especially if, you know, when in metastasis, in colorectal metastasis, because, you know, this distribution of the albumin actually, you know, may be different to the distribution of the spheres, and we know in fact that it is, okay? So we shouldn't withhold treatment to patients, even if the matching is not all that good. We may consider in those cases maybe a dose reduction, just in case. Okay, so the workflow of the procedure is, you know, once all the screening evaluations have been done, the workup angiogram, the MAA scan, all the team has to sit together with all the available information and then decide, you know, how much dose are we going to give to the patient, yeah, and decide how the treatment is going to take place. So what about dosimetry? Dosimetry, well, is difficult and complex. Why? Because it's dependent on, you know, some particles being injected in the hepatic artery and finding the way towards the tumors in the liver. So there is, you know, it's a process that we cannot control actually. Okay. Now it depends obviously on the pattern of arterial blood flow. It's not the same, you know. Depends on the velocity of injection. If we do a quick injection, probably we're going to get a different distribution as if we do a slow infusion. It's not the same to have turbulent flow or laminar flow. So all these factors may affect the distribution of the spheres. Also it's important, try to avoid something like this. This is a spasm in the artery. Obviously, you know, an artery without spasm is not going to carry blood in the same way as an artery with spasm. So a spasm, you know, is going to have an effect on the distribution of the spheres. Also, the density of the spheres and the specific activity of each sphere is important. Also, the vessel density within the tumor, the number of vessels that are feeding the tumor, the shunting to the GI tract. That's why dosimetry is complex and difficult. But I think there are certain basic rules that we shouldn't forget. So the rules is like, one, don't give too much radiation, okay? And how much radiation is too much radiation? In the case of the lung, we should never exceed the 25 gray limit. If we give more than 25 grays to the lung, the patient is going to develop radiation pneumonitis. So we should always keep our dose below the 25 gray limit, ideally not more than 20 gray. For the tumor, we need to give HCC 120 gray, so this is our target. Okay? There is no point in giving 200 gray. 120 is enough, so we don't have to overtreat, but we don't want to undertreat neither. So the key is give 120 gray to the tumor without reaching the 25 gray limit to the lung. And what about the healthy liver? What's the limit for the liver? Okay, the limit for the healthy liver would be 70 grays. But don't forget that we are, many of these patients would be HCC patients. That means they have a cirrhotic liver. So cirrhotic livers or livers that have been heavily treated with chemo before have a different dose limit. 70 gray is too high for them. So we shouldn't go above the 50 gray limit for the impaired or cirrhotic liver. So the idea is to give 120 gray to the tumor without exceeding the 25 gray limit to the lungs, the 70 gray limit for healthy liver, or if the liver is not healthy, the 50 gray limit. And now, so how do we play that? Okay. Well, there are two ways of calculating the dose. There's the partition model and the body surface area model. The partition model is used when we have a single localized big tumor. The typical example is, one or two HCC focal lesions, well-defined, that we can actually measure the volume and size, okay? So, and there's a formula by which we calculate the dose that we give, which is based on the mass of the tumor, okay? The body surface area model, on the other way, well, it's in a way it's a bit of an empirical model, because it was derived from the way oncologists prescribe chemotherapy. When oncologists prescribe chemotherapy to a patient, they decide the dosing based on the size of the patient. That's what they use the body surface area. The body surface area is just a measurement of the size of the patient. We are assuming that the size of the liver of a patient is according to the size of the patient itself. And this is not always true. You can have a small patient with a very big liver. You can have a big patient with a very small liver. So in those cases, the body surface area, of the patient will not be related to the size of the liver. Nevertheless, despite all this, we know that the body surface area formula calculation works, because tens of thousands of patients have been treated using this formula, and they've done well. So the only thing we need to consider is that if there is increased lung shunting, we have to reduce the dose. Okay. So far I've been talking about formulae, but now, real life is this is not mathematics. Medicine is a science, but it's not an exact science. So we need to use a lot of common sense, okay? So despite having a formula, we still have to use common sense and decide, we have to consider, if we are treating the whole liver, obviously the risk is going to be bigger than if we are treating only a portion of liver. If we treat only a portion of liver, we can be more aggressive, because there is healthy liver not receiving radiation that can actually carry on with the liver function. Also, the ratio between tumor to normal liver has importance. The amount of tumor is not the same to treat a patient with a lot of tumor than with very little tumor, and also the state of the liver. So all these things have to be taken into consideration when we calculate the dose. There is no formula for this, but we just have to use common sense and decide whether to increase the dose or reduce the dose according to this. And also, I think that the big advantage of Seer spheres is that you can actually tailor the treatment for each patient. You can do, for example, in cases where you have a focal, well-defined lesion confined to a segment of the liver, You can do what is called a radiation segmentectomy, like in this case. So you can do a very super selective catheterization, and you're going to, only this part of the liver is going to receive radiation, so you can be very aggressive, okay? And to treat that tumor, because there is a lot of healthy liver that will not receive radiation, so the liver failure is not a problem here, or radiation-induced liver disease. There are some other cases where you may have like 2 lesions, but confined to 1 lobe, and then in this case you can do what's called a LOBA treatment. That means you are leaving all this part of the liver untouched, so you can also have maybe a more aggressive approach. Here, for example, there are lesions everywhere in the liver, and you're going to do a whole liver treatment. Here you have to be careful, You have to be careful because if you give too much radiation, the patient is going to develop radiation-induced liver disease and liver failure and can potentially die from that, okay? And also, well, there are ways of overcoming this. If you want to be safer, you can actually, what's called a sequential LOBA treatment. You can treat 1 lobe in 1 session, 1 lobe in a different session, separate 6 weeks apart, so there's no radiation-induced disease, finish. Or you can do that on the same session. And that's all, my friends. Thank you very much.